For all my people that are joining us, please feel free, go ahead and drop in. Just roll, where you're from. Just a quick get to know. I find that there's a lot of really great networking that happens in these. So I'm certainly excited. I know that this is going to be a topic that for a lot of you, it could be more about, how do I get to that? How do I get to these leadership roles? And so we're definitely going to talk to some of that. So for some of you who might be either an account executive, a frontline manager, I think that this session is going to be pretty dope for all of you, right? Not just the people that are looking to hire, but as you get hired, how do you make sure that you can make it and that you set yourself up for success? So I'm really looking forward to this as well too. So Matt, I'm joined by my good friend here, Mr. Matt Cameron. Matt, how are you doing this morning for you?
Yeah. You're talking to me on a very, very hot week in Vegas. I think we've got some days where we're hitting 115 with an overnight chilly low of 86. So, it's warming up.
Yeah, we hit 99 in Austin yesterday.
Nice.
And it was like in Austin, and you know the difference, right? It's like Austin's got a little bit more humidity. So that's like, it feels like a solid like 106 or 107. Like it was gross, right? So we went to the pool at 11. I'm like, this is a bad idea. This is a very, very bad idea. So I'm looking forward to tearing down this topic just for everybody, as you start to join us, like I said, whether you're on Zoom, whether you're on LinkedIn, shout out, let's see who we got joining here. Again, go ahead if you're in the Zoom. Muhammad says, is Jake looking fresh? He's probably referring to my sweet haircut that I got on Friday. So I appreciate you noticing. What's up, Grant? Let's see, Hamid. Who else has joined us here? Anna, Matt. So what's going on, everybody? If you're in the chat on the Zoom, do me a favor. Like I said, just drop in your role and company name. You do it on LinkedIn too. I find, again, like I cannot tell you, Matt, I don't know if you've ever had this happen. I had someone hit me up. They're like, yeah, like I just got really active in the chat. And then all of a sudden, like I ended up getting like a new business meeting out of it. So I'm like, great, love it.
Yep.
So
good.
So drop your name. I know some people are like, oh man, I don't know. Do I want to drop it in there? There you go. Anya's leading the charge here. Solutions consultant at Thought Exchange. And again, as always, if you have questions, Matt and I both love to take questions and love to kind of dive into, the nitty gritty of what you want to hear. At the end of the day, we're up here, we're live, we're talking through this stuff. So if there are things that are top of mind for you, things that you're like, man, why is this happening? Or I've got this situation that's popped up, you should definitely hop in. Grant, CTO, based out of KC, holla. If you all don't know, I'm also from Kansas City. So great. So as we're getting started now, Matt, I want to kind of, our goal for today is navigating the murky waters of hiring, leadership hiring. But really this goes deeper, right? This goes to a lot of different things around, how to but whether you're on the hiring side or the hiree side, there's just so many things that go into successful hiring specifically around this role, whether you're on the candidate side coming into your role or you're on the the company side. And so maybe what I want to do is I want to start maybe at just a little high level, and let's talk about what are some of the common things. And let's go both ways. Let's go both ways. So as a hiring team, a CEO maybe, or someone hiring in a leader, what are some of the more common pitfalls that you see, or what are some of the more common mistakes that you see people make when it comes to hiring that first VP or even a later stage VP that may or may not be set up for success?
Yeah, I think it is stage dependent. So let's talk about maybe the first VP, first hire. People make the mistake of hiring somebody who is coming from a situation where they've been operating inside of a machine.
Yep.
And they're very, very good at operating that machine, but they weren't there when it was built. So yeah, I mean, you've seen that 100 times, right?
Yep, so exactly.
That's a problem. So you got to watch that. Secondly, if you're a person thinking about coming in and taking, maybe you've been a manager in a larger organization or whatnot, coming in to do that, just realize that your first role actually looks a lot like sales operations. You're doing the selling with your reps, doing the coaching, but they're going to expect you to set up the infrastructure, the sales process, methodology, the Salesforce instance, the outreach, and that sounds non-obvious or nonsensical, but it is exactly what you'll be doing at an early stage company, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So if that doesn't sound exciting to you, then maybe the early stage stuff is not right. And then if you think later on down the track, where people have had a first head of sales, VP of sales, what do you want to call them, then they trying to top them is the language. I think is a little aggressive.
Layered. Yeah. Layered is the other one. You don't want to, let me tell you this, it feels great when you come into a role like there's an expectation set of that. Yeah, you're going to be layered. Like we already know that you're not going to be good enough. So we're just going to go ahead and tell you that up front.
Yeah, so that's pretty horrible. But let's say you come in and you're number 2 or 3, and the mistake that people make there is they go and hire the person from a really large company with a great brand and expect them to, they've just been working with a team of 140 people under them or something like that, or 1,000 people. I've actually seen a specific example out of Oracle where they had a 2,000 person team, had been at Oracle 16 years, and then took over a 90 person team. Right. And they've got no idea how to run a 90 person team. When you've had 2,000, you've got managers of managers of managers of managers reporting to you. You know what I mean? Like you're an expert in.
But it looks good to the board though, Matt. It looks so good to the board that look, we got this person from Oracle.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a trap people fall into. So don't do that. So be stage appropriate in your hiring. And if you're a person considering these roles, really understand what the nuts and bolts of the role would be at this stage. And by the way, don't listen to the executive at the current company because maybe they don't know, right? They haven't been through it. So this is where you go to your mentors and say, hey, listen, I'm picking up this role. It's 5 million going to 20, or it's 20 going to 50. Based on your experience, what are the dimensions of the role? What do I need to be thinking about?
Yeah, so what I heard in there was, again, just really being thoughtful about what you need now and the skill sets that people have or haven't. Me, I was kind of interesting. It's like, I didn't realize that I was like meant to, like that I would be good at that stage. But when I look back at my career, when I got my first VP of sales job, 10 years ago or so, I had came from a bigger company that I'd been at, but I had helped to kind of launch the new office and territory. And before that, I was in sports, and it was a small team where there's a lot of things that needed to be built out. And so I didn't realize that I had that skill. But now that I look back, it's exactly what you said, that even though I worked at a company that had almost 1,000 salespeople, I was in like a smaller office that was starting from scratch and kind of was a part of that growth and building of it, and saw it grow from 20 to 100 and something people in the office. And as I got into hiring, man, I can't tell you how bad I made that mistake, because I think even, we're talking about leadership, but I think it's also for salespeople. It's like, what stage are you the best at, as a salesperson? So for those of you that are in sales, understanding that, if you go from Salesforce or Oracle to another company, the sale could be completely different. And then therefore, that as a leader, if you learned a sales process that's built around, I'm from Salesforce, do you want to take a conversation, versus like, I'm from nobody's heard of you.io, and we're trying to educate the market on, behavioral scoring using AI, that you might be in trouble. And I think when people don't, I think it's because, Matt, and maybe you can speak to this. My always hypothesis around this is that, for whatever reason in sales, right? Like, so Matt, let's talk about coding, for example. If just because someone knows how to write Java, okay, doesn't mean that they can still code in BASIC, or that they could probably figure out Ruby and a few other, but they're all different. It's all different architecture. It's all different ways of writing code. Now, there's some things that are similar, right? There's some like consistent themes. But when it comes to sales, many times at the leadership level, the CEO level, they think sales is sales. And they don't quite understand that sales is also a process based on, average sales price, who you sell into, and these other, kind of frameworks. And so why do you think, Matt, why do you think so many companies struggle? Obviously we all know about how short the tenure of a VP of sales is, especially the first VP. And usually it's usually the first VP and sometimes the second, if not the third, but I would say almost without fail, 2 out of the first 3 don't work. And I'll just define don't work by they're there for less than a year and a half. Why do you think, if we know this, because everything that you and I are talking about, people have talked about, why do you think it continues to happen? Or why do you think it still becomes so difficult to find the right person who's going to stick for at least an extended period?
I think it's because it's a romantic dance we do where no one's completely candid and transparent about what's going on going into it, right? If you think about the buying side of it from the customer company side of it,
Yeah.
they paint a picture that is as rosy as can be about the company, what's going on, the challenges they face, and whatever else. And what they really need to do, if they want to get a really great, perfect fit candidate, is they need to start the conversation from the perspective of, let me tell you all the reasons why you wouldn't take this job. Right? Here are all the things that suck. That we need to fix. And if you found the right candidate, they're going to be super excited and go, "Oh, thank goodness, all that's broken because I'm a builder.
I
I'm a
love
fixer.
it.
That's what
I
I
love it.
want." Now, how many recruiting processes have you seen like that? Excuse me.
Only the best, though. I
Uh,
just hired a woman, our VP of business operations, and that was kind of how it went down. And it's I think, and we're both excited about it, right? To your point.
yeah, 100%. And also, people do it for the first time when they don't need to. Excuse me. So, you've got investors, you've got mentors, you've got advisors. You should be talking to them about creating frameworks for decision-making frameworks and hiring frameworks, right? And I think too many first-time executive teams make this up from scratch, and they don't need to. It's a solved problem.
It's totally a solved problem. And when I think about this too, it's yeah, this is we could just do a whole other session on hiring and like interview bias and like that. But some of that, though, I think what you're saying is actually very real as a part of this, right? It's like, and because I hear it in the VC world, right? And VCs and the advice that I hear, some very prolific VCs, they say hire this type of person at this stage. And and it just perpetuates itself.
Yeah.
If you keep doing that, you keep just hiring that one persona, but the data shows you that it's not working, but still the advice is hire this persona, right? And I think, Matt, you've probably been a part of hearing VCs talk about this. I know I certainly have heard this and been in those meetings myself personally, and also seen posts about it or shares on, but like it's not working. Right. And so I think some of the things you're talking about this concept of transparency, and I like what you said too about, it's okay as a candidate too, that this isn't your jam either, that you as a candidate saying, look, let me tell you the areas where I'm not as strong, and be very upfront about what that means. And I think sometimes the candidate is also doing the dance, not realizing that if both sides are doing the dance, maybe you're getting 50% of the way there, and that other 50% is a pretty substantial miss.
I don't want to bury the lead on this, or perhaps bring up the gold I should be saving for the end. But let me I'll give you a tactical tip everyone should do if you're thinking about a leadership role. Very few people do this, and if they don't let you, then don't take the job. I would never, as a VP going into a company, go beyond reference checks without my internal reference check, which includes, thanks, Jake, I'm delighted you're reference checking me. Both sides feel good about the role. So what I want is an hour with your sales ops techie, and we're going to sit down and go through your CRM instance, because I just want to understand the state of the pipeline, your win rates, your closing, because they bullshit you. And so if they won't let you do that, then there's something wrong, right? Sign the NDA. I want to look in your CRM, because why have the oh shit moment after you've joined? Have it before you've joined, and then tell the executive what you've learned and what you would do about it.
Yeah, but that's such a great concept, right? It's the diligence should happen both ways, and I think that's a big part of this, coupled with again, it's like, oh, our average sales price, or oh, it's this, our sales cycle is this. It's never, especially early stage founders, like I would say it's grossly overestimated by between 20 to 50%, right? The sales cycles are shorter by 20 to 50%, and the average sales price is bigger than what it actually is. And again, like you said, if you're a first-time VP going into this, or you're really into the opportunity, and I got to tell you, look, as a CEO, if I had a high-performing candidate that asked me to do that, I would be pumped. I would be like, great, like this is amazing, and I'll kind of add to that. The other thing is that I feel like especially I'm talking startup, I would, if you don't have a company and you're coming in at a senior leadership level, VP, and they're not willing to share with you things like how many shares are outstanding. Why won't you share? I can't imagine the amount of people I've heard of this, right? Where companies just say, oh, you get X number of shares. And my friends, that means nothing. Nothing, right? Because they can dilute it at any given time. There's just a whole bunch of issues, I think, too, that if you're a first-time VP, I certainly didn't know and would have done differently in retrospect, but I didn't know, right? So you don't know what you don't know. But I think equity is the other piece. Great. Who are the other shareholders? Who are the other like major shareholders?
Mm-hmm.
You know, again, like that's the team you're signing up for, you know, Mr. and Mrs. VP. You know, you're signing up for that group of people. And so I just think that this concept of doing the diligence, I think, is great. And also, you know, for everyone out there, some people, I think maybe, possibly, Matt, might be like, well, that sounds like a lot of work. It's like, you're talking about the next year and a half of your life. And I feel like sometimes candidates in particular don't do a very good job of doing that, the amount of diligence that they need to make the right decision.
100%.
So what do you think? So you join a company. One of the common things I hear, and we're going to talk about this early stage. So these are usually companies that are scaling 0 to 5 million, or maybe it's 5 to 15. It just depends. Is, you know, this concept of we're going to hire a manager and make them an AE first. What are your thoughts on that process? We want you to come in and we want you to really just, you know, just get in the trenches, be that AE, and then, you know, we'll build a team once it's scalable.
Right. And so the context here is that they have 1 or 2 other AEs or none, or what are you thinking?
Potentially. Let's just say they might already have a couple of salespeople, or maybe a few, right? Even if they have 3 or 4.
Okay.
So if the answer is different, then, by the way, Matt, if the answer is different, if it's 0, then call that out too, for sure.
Yeah, let's start with 0 because I've got a strong opinion on this. And you and I haven't talked about this. It'd be interesting if you have a differing opinion, and then that'll be really interesting to learn. People often say to me, oh, we're ready to start hiring. So what we're going to do is going to hire the person who can manage and lead the team as our first AE, and they can scale a team behind them. I think that's exactly the wrong thing to do, because what you need in the next 6-12 months is revenue. So go and hire the best AEs you possibly can, regardless of whether or not they have leadership potential or aspirations, because getting a manager is not that hard. What's hard is getting somebody who can hit the ground with no structure, no resources, no case studies or references, and sell. So go hire 2 really, really good AEs. And if one of them floats up and wants to be a manager, great. But if not, no problem. Go get one from the outside. That's my perspective. So before I answer the second, what do you think of that, Jake?
I think it's right. I think you would try to hire someone that had maybe had a few levels of managerial experience, or maybe had like some team lead experience. But I also worry about hiring in any AEs. I mean, shit, dude, I saw this firsthand at one of my VP stints, and it wasn't good for a VP. Is if when you hire in those first few AEs, you're too scared as a CEO, and that's really the right word. It's scared to have a very direct conversation with the AEs. Like, we are going to be bringing in a senior director or VP at some point. There's an opportunity that possibly, you know, that we might be able to, that one of you might be able to be like the leader, etc. But because of that, I see there's actually some perverse behavior that happens around, you know, Matt, they're like, then when the company starts to interview, the top 1 or 2 people feel slighted.
Yep.
You know, they're like, or they're just negative. That's what I had, man. At my second VP, and the CEO wouldn't let me fire him. This guy was stopping us from scaling. You know, because he thought the job should have been his. He had his way of doing it. And when we were hiring new people, he was just poisoning the well. And that's the downside of this, is that first AE is, if you're not very straightforward with your AEs when you hire them, you're going to create a really bad situation for your first VP. I can promise you that.
100%. And look, that's very common as you scale anyway, as you get that first cohort of people that are used to do everything without process, seat of hands, crazy discounting. And sometimes when you put sort of the, you know, adult supervision in there, you bring in that next level, if you like, you put structure and process and predictability around it. They're not on board. They don't want to play that way. And that's okay. You know what? They might have done the first 18 months, 2 years. Head off to the next crazy startup and do that right again. Good for you. But let's just be candid about it. So yeah. If you think then about, well, I have a couple of reps and I want you to sell. And when we're ready to grow, then maybe, you know, you're obviously the manager we're hiring for. Problem with that is you've then got, let's say you got 3 or 4 people who all actually feel like peers. And now you've got to make that manager go from that very uncomfortable peer to manager position. Mm-hmm. And maybe I outsold you because I've been there 6 months earlier. And then why are you going to be my boss? So my perspective, and I'll call it out. ClearSlide used to do this. You know, I don't think it played that well in many cases. And I think some people think of it like Hunger Games. You put them in, and they better outsell all the other reps, and then they get the promotion or not, right? And I'm like, this is ridiculous. So here's my perspective. I believe that it works if you say, we've just hired a manager, and for the next 6 months, the manager is going to learn the product, the market thing through doing, right? But they are the manager. So essentially like a team lead where you have a quota and you're the manager. So you run team meetings, you do all sort of carry on selling at the same time. I would only do this if I didn't have the resources to help them get up to speed with all that stuff without selling it themselves, or if we didn't have the financial runway to have them not carrying a quota. So they're essentially a player coach, right? And we all know that's a financial necessity sometimes early on, but I believe upfront they need to be labeled as the leader, so you don't have all that drama. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think, you know, again, but I would, this is the difference, you know, again, we're using the title VP. There's actually, I've got a couple of really good questions here too that have popped up that I think we should dive into. You know, it doesn't matter. VP, director, senior director, manager, I don't know what the other job titles are. You know, what we're really talking about is the person who's brought in to run the show. And I can tell you, nobody gives a shit if you're a VP and then you go to your next job and say, well, I was a VP of sales and you manage 10 people, right? Nobody's now like, oh, Johnny Smith's a VP. It's like, no, dude, you were a glorified manager. And like, I'm pretty quickly going to see through that. And if you go to work at a bigger tech company, you're going to be a manager, yep. Right? Maybe a director. And so I just think about the kind of the concept here of what, you know, if you're going to bring in a leader, right? I think you cannot tell them you're going to be an AE first. I think, you know, like I'll just go back to like where it worked really well is, you know, and again, I did my diligence. What's the first 3 to 6 months of hiring going to look like? And there were, and you know, am I going to have the runway to grow and experiment and not have to have it all perfect? You know, and the answer is yes. And I wouldn't have taken the job if not, because then it would have been that. And that's what I see leaders do is they just, you know, they get sold a bill of goods and they're like, you know, they don't actually do the diligence. Whereas I did the diligence. I'm like, great. And what's our headcount going to look like in 3 months, 6 months? What's already forecasted? Okay, great. So if we're at those revenue targets, that's what we're going to be hiring to. Amazing. And don't get me wrong, I had to go in and get in the trenches and make shit happen, you know, and close a bunch of deals and help the team close deals. But I was also focused on the, you know, scaling and building, et cetera. So I just think as long, like, I think the big point that we're getting to, whether you're on the hiring side or you're on the candidate side, is just be transparent, you know, label it what it is, label it what it's not. So that's,
I'd also say, Jake, one more thing on that. If you've got
yeah.
folks on the call who are going to be in player coach roles or accepting player coach roles, I always tell people, do what you just said, which is have a line in the sand with KPIs or metrics that must be true, at which point I become no longer a quota carrying directly, right?
Yeah.
The minute we have 5 reps or the minute we have this revenue in the team or whatever it is, that happens. And now I don't have an individual quota. Because if you don't have that, most companies tend to drag you along in that role for as long as possible. And it's a tough.
Yeah, you're bringing up a really good point. I'm trying to think, I can't, man, it's been 10 years, so I don't specifically remember, but I do remember. Yeah, I think, I don't remember if we negotiated up front or it's in the first 3 months, but I had that exact same conversation. I was like, look, I don't want an individual percentage. I don't want it. Like, anytime you as a manager are taking an individual percentage, what ends up happening is, you know what, I must have done it really early, Matt, because I don't know if this is a best practice by any means, but you know, if imagine a world, you know what, I know I did. I know I said I don't want it in the beginning. And now I'm kind of remembering like why I know how. It's because I knew that you don't want to create an incentive ever for a manager to work an account and for me to not bring in someone to quarterback and teach and grow, etc. So if you're telling me you're going to pay me 15% or whatever on this deal, but you're telling them, you know, but if the team closes it, I get 5, fuck that. Give me 7 on everything and 12 if we hit our team number. And I think that would be my advice, is that you don't, because so instead what I was incentivized to do, Matt, is for every big deal, I was bringing 1 or 2 of our top reps with me. And then they were, you know, and so again, anytime you do that incentive where the manager's got a quota, and I'm telling you, it's not good. It's just not good. And find the people that care. Matt, I didn't care that in the first 6 months, I probably could have made more money because I was closing my own deals. I was building a sales organization, right? And if I had, so why create that incentive? And so I can just tell you from my own experience, I didn't want it. And I think the right leader too is like, okay, wait, we're talking about like an extra 15K here over 6 months, like versus me having 20 to 15 extra people. Like, I think that the right candidate is going to say something similar too. Okay, this is a really good one. Tom, I'm going to guess it's Wale. Tom Wale. Tom, you can tell me if I got it right or not. So Tom actually has a really good question here. And it was around hiring these people. So the first question was, any thoughts on how to assess for the urgency needed at startups? And I'll interpret what he's saying. He's saying speed. He's saying any thoughts, how do you, when you think about if you're a company, and then vice versa, if you're a candidate, and then by the way, the beautiful part is this applies to no matter what point you're in your career, this is just a different question. How do you, as a company, assess for someone's urgency, if they have urgency or not? Because, and I'll actually go ahead and address the second one, because he talks about, people cutting through the BS to sell themselves. Oh, I've done this. No, I move with a sense of urgency. How do you think about cutting through the noise as the employer first? So you're the person hiring a VP or you're hiring a manager. Again, like I think a lot of this advice will apply, fairly universally, but what about at the VP level? How do you cut through the noise?
Yeah, so he also used the language CRO, which I'll come back to just touch on briefly. CRO is a title that's been thrown around too frequently today. CRO looks after marketing and sales and revenue coming through CS. And usually, most of the times, it's actually just a sales leader with a CRO title. If you're talking CRO, then you should be much further down the track typically. But anyway, let's just talk about head of sales. How do you do it? Simple. Behavioral interviewing. What does that mean? It means you don't talk about what they would do, could do, should do. You talk about what they have done. And in this specific instant, Jake, you know what I'd say is like, walk me through your operating rhythm and your cadence. Talk to me about your typical week, month, quarter, what are the key intervention points, how you spend your time. If I were to, can you share with me your calendar from the last 2 weeks? Like, just pop it on the screen. Let me see it. And can you just walk me through it? Like how you spent your time? Can't bullshit there, can you? If you pop it up on the screen, it's, oh, I see. So looks like 3/4 of it was
pipeline review, manager review.
Right. Yeah. Internal talk fest, blah, blah, right. So, understand that, because, in large organizations, perhaps to Tom's point, most of the time it's about telling people up the line what you have been doing and justifying your existence.
I just want to double click before you move forward. Okay. All my friends out there, this skill, and I know it sounds like bullshit, is just what you're signing up for. That if the reality is that you as a individual want to move up, the skill of managing up becomes part of the job. And a lot of people don't realize that soon enough. And in managing up and managing cross-departmentally too, and building relationships. So sorry, just call that.
That's a key thing. In fact, one of the assessment criteria in larger companies is demonstrates the ability to influence internally. So if you're a very large organization, it's matrixed, and there are people, you need influence without authority, right? Mm-hmm. My team needs this, it's product, it's marketing, it's comp, it's whatever it is. And even though folks don't report to me, I need to have the internal gravitas to get stuff done. So managing up, a lot of people think it's negative and political. It's not. No. It's about being an effective executive.
Boom. That's right. That's so spot on. So just to dispel any rumors, there is a right way to not. Here's the thing: those brown-nosed people that there are certain organizations where they can thrive. Most organizations, those people hit a ceiling pretty early, or late, or again, they work in finance or some other places. So where politics becomes what the job, more and more the job is than the work product. But for the most part, managing up is a good thing, right? And meeting expectations of your leader makes everyone happy and you happy, and as opposed to just you doing what you think's important. Okay, you're on a roll, and I might have derailed it.
No, it's fine. I think to sum up in both the last couple of questions we've had, for me, it's proof of work, right? It's like show me, don't tell me, show me. So as I said, if I was having a Zoom interview with Jake right now, I would literally say that, hey, do me a favor, if you don't have anything particularly sensitive from last week, like customer names or anything, can you just pop your screen up? I'd love to see what your week looks like. you know, and if they can't show you last week, they can find one a few weeks ago.
Yeah, exactly.
The good news is they don't know what you're looking for. I've just said, may I have a look at your calendar so I understand how you're spending your time. So they don't know whether it's good.
Yeah, that's going to help. Yeah, that's going to help me. Yeah, I'd probably do that. I'd be like, yeah, that's going to help me just kind of like conceptualize this. You know, I'm a visual person, you know, etc. Yeah, and the thing, I love that idea. I'm stealing that, by the way, Matt. Look at their calendar. Actually, that's actually a really good proxy for this, because I'll tell you the other one is the reference conversations, at least for me. And I think one of the big mistakes is that companies, you know, you should never ask someone for, like, we don't ask for references at Skaled. Instead, what we do is looking at their resume, and because we've already went through their career progression, we say, great, I want to be introduced to this boss and this boss. Can you facilitate that introduction today or tomorrow? I don't need to talk to the people that are going to tell me how great you are and that you're a unique special flower. That's why most reference checks, like, people don't take them seriously. It's like there's almost no point in probably like 90% of companies even doing reference checks. But there's no better way than to talk to their previous boss and multiple of their previous bosses, and then ask very specific questions around, great, so, you know, tell me about, you know, the time that, you know, so-and-so built a process from scratch, right? And get the real, you know? And if this person truly was a builder, they're that first VP or director or whatever, they're going to go, oh yeah, it was this and this, you know, as opposed to like.
Agreed. I would add to that. I will allow them to direct me to a couple of references specific to fact finding. I'll say, who in your background could tell me, because you said you did A, B, C, and D. So who could talk to me about that? And for me, I don't care what they think of them. I just fact find. And then I ask them, like if I was talking about reps, a little bit different, but if there were multiple managers, I would ask, relative to their peers, where did they stack rank? That's always interesting to me. Right.
And I think listen to Matt's vernacular too. And Matt, you mentioned a point too. I meant to talk about it then. You don't ask people how you would handle a situation. You don't ask people how they, you know, think that they stacked up. It's, tell me a time when you did this. Tell me this, and I can't tell you how many times, you know, we're interviewing a lot now, and I have to stop a candidate, you know, I'll let him go and then say, okay, that's great. Like, that's a good anecdotal. Give me a specific project. I need a specific, like, because a lot of people like, yeah, you know, I typically am the person in a group who does blah, blah, blah. I'm typically working cross. Nope. Tell me about a time you did that.
I agree completely, especially on project. One other thing I'd add to that is if you're looking for, say, grit, everyone will say grit or tenacity, and they'll make the mistake of asking the question, can you tell me about a time when you had to, you know, persist through a blah, blah, blah and do X, Y, Z? And there are a number of questions we ask, and we want to ask for that one example. You know what? We've probably all got one example.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
We're trying to figure out, is this a way of thinking, a way of behaving? So then if I take that example for a minute, then I want to know, well, what does Jake actually think is hard? So I ask you, so what has been the most challenging professional experience you've been through? Can you walk me through it and how you dealt with that? Something that took, you know, a bunch of persistence and time to get through. And you tell me, well, there's this one time that there were no pencils in the cupboard and I had to go to the store myself and buy them.
Ooh,
you wouldn't believe
wow.
it. And so now I know that that's what Jake thinks is challenging. So I don't need the one anecdote. I'm like, oh, you think that's hard? Well, you're going to find it pretty tricky here, my friend.
Yeah, that's yeah, like the office manager wasn't there, Matt. Like, you won't believe it, dude. And then I had the idea. I'm just gonna go get in the car and do it myself.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So yeah, honestly, this happens almost every single review process I have a look at, interview process I look at. There'll be that question, which is, tell me about a time when, because the criteria is a successful enterprise sales leader or whatever else, right? And so they say, tell me about a time when. Well, if you do it once, doesn't mean you are that person. You did it once.
Yeah. Yeah, and we have a question on our experience interview, which is, well, our experience interview, I think it's you know, we've dialed it in over the years, and it's the same 5 questions for every role really, and in every one of those, one of the questions is, tell me about what was the low point, right? And that's kind of a different way of asking it. And then what happens, Matt, it's similar. It's like once you get to the second or third job, you start to see what people internalize as a low point, and then because the sister question, the next question is, what was the high point? Yeah, and so you start to then see the patterns of behavior. And I think that that's what we're talking about. When you're hiring You're looking for patterns, and that's why that experience interview. Becca, I don't know if it's too late notice, but if we could, maybe if we have a template, we could share that with people too, because it's got some of those questions Matt mentioned in there too. So I got another question. So let's talk maybe about the timing of bringing in the first VP, and let's talk about maybe advisors or like advisors plus. So you've got a team that's growing and scaling. When do you think, bringing in maybe not a full-time person, like when does that make sense? And obviously I've got some hot takes on that as well too, but like, what do you feel like, is a good time to leverage a interim resource or like an advisor kind of plus a little more hands-on version?
Yeah, I don't think anybody should do anything for the first time by themselves in this space. As we said before, everything's been figured out. So whether it be founder sales, excuse me, when you're still selling yourself, you should have an advisor. When you hire reps, you should have an advisor to help you hire those reps, and then maybe to coach them and manage them. So I don't think it's ever too early to have an advisor. I think the real question is, when do you make that full-time? Well,
yeah.
So yeah, I think for me, it's nuanced, and it would be, I would use an advisor to the point where building culture, building team becomes obviously important outside of the whole company team culture, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, you're trying to build that sales team culture. Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's almost a perfect definition of it, which is like, why do anything, for the first time without support? You have the money, the resources, and the ability to do it. We all know in business, there's no reward for doing it all yourself. The reward's for getting it right, not being right. And then, I think that's a really great kind of time to think about, look, for all of you who know or don't know, we do a lot of interim sales leadership work. And it could be leadership on the sales side, it could be sales development, it could be operations. And the way that I think about it is it's foundation building. That again, a lot of the times finding a great builder who's done it 2 or 3 times and wants to do it again is hard. Because if you've done it a few times, which I have and many have, I'm just a sadist. Like, this is like, I love it. It's that, imagine a world where instead you can hire, just imagine the skill of a person. You can come in, it's like the basic playbook has been documented, sales operations is set up, and then a person can focus on not spending, you go and spend all this money on this first leader, and you have them spend the first 3 to 6 months just getting up to speed. Like, if you bring in someone who's been there and done it, they don't like, I know what needs to happen. Like, this is where we're at. We're going to need to document this. This is how we should think about scaling our marketing, our outbound efforts. And so for us, the clients that we have, and so for anybody who's, kind of doing this, if you're interested in learning more, please feel free to hit me up. I think we really come in and serve as a number 2, whether sometimes it's a number 2 to a VP who, again, they've got a part of their org. Maybe it's the SDR org or an inside sales org that, again, they haven't done it before. And so we've seen a lot of success, something I haven't done before, new division, not quite ready to bring in that full-time person for 4 reps. And then I think the way that you explained it, Matt, was pretty spot on, which is where we know it's time. We go to our clients sometimes. It's like, it's time. like you're scaling, like your business is doing extremely well. Like, now let's help you to find the right person, onboard them, set them up for success, etc. And so I think it's just in sales, sometimes there's a bravado, behind it of like bringing in more interim support that I think we're seeing kind of crack down. So this is definitely a topic I can talk a lot about. And I want to talk about maybe another challenge. So again, bringing VPs in and expecting them to just do all the building, right? That's another challenge. What about leadership development? So like, let's say you do find a person. I think right now, Matt, from my vantage point, the mantra is almost like, well, we hired you to do that job as a VP. And then on the frontline level, I mean, don't get me started about hiring frontline leaders, but usually the mantra is like, well, like, you did the job before. Like, you were a successful seller or whatever. You can do this. So like, what are some of the pitfalls, or what are some of the best ways to set, kind of senior, and how do you think about development when it comes to senior leadership and frontline leadership as you're starting to scale that?
Yeah. So I come back to the sporting analogy, which I think the executives will understand immediately, right? Which is, do you think, Kobe Bryant stopped being coached because he was successful. No. And in fact, every one of these elite athletes has nutrition coaches, strength conditioning, technical coaches, psychological support, blah, blah, blah. And if that makes sense to you, then why would we be any different in leadership, right? We need to keep sharpening the saw. We need to get outside perspectives on what we're doing. And none of us are perfect across all dimensions. Present company excluded, Jake. So, I think that, if you're hiring a new VP, then best practice is to set aside a budget for mentoring, for a coach, bare minimum. And then separate to that, there should be a personal development budget, right? But so, for example, there are a lot of great mastermind groups out there that you can join, right? So your VPs, 10 of you meet once a month, those sorts of things. There'll be,
especially now. I feel like Matt now is like, it's one of the best times, I think, for some of this.
100%. And then there'll be tactical things. So people are wanting to become more higher level thinking in their leadership. So conscious leadership, emotionally intelligent leadership, things like that. You don't just pick that up along the way. You need frameworks for thinking, and then you need repetition and guidance and support along those ways. So I think that all the CEOs out there should be thinking about that. Two parts, right? One is during the interview process, have a candid conversation about this. Like, have you had mentors or coaches in the past? What are you looking for? But make sure that that equity and or cash amount is set aside, and your board can give you some advice on that. And separately, if you were to invest in yourself over the next couple of years, what are the areas you think you want to invest? And make sure they understand it's not a trick question about, what are your weaknesses?
What are your weaknesses? It's like a really shitty way to ask. Like,
let's not do that, right? But it needs to be, look, I'm going to set aside a budget for you. And what I'd like you to think about is, would you want to join a group? Would you want some formal coaching? Like, what would it be, right? But yeah, I mean, the trouble with early stage companies, I think, Jake, is they don't have the budget. Right. So it's like there's no formal L&D program for leadership. I mean, even companies that are very mature that I work with, publicly listed companies, they're really good at enabling and developing the ICs, but they forget to do the management, or they're an afterthought. They get they get 10% of it.
Let's double click on that for a second. I know it's not kind of technically we're talking about hiring senior leadership, but a lot of people might either be going into being a manager for the first time, or even the second time, or just maybe a manager step up or hire the companies. Like, let's say again, because we're talking like 0 to 20 million. So maybe you're in that 15 to 20 million, and now you've got managers of managers. Yeah. What are some things that you can do to make sure that you do have that focus? Because again, like you said, it's remarkable. And I feel very blessed. If I look back in my career, I was very fortunate. Again, I'd had kind of a part-time leadership, like team lead type role at my very first role. But when I first went into being a full-time manager, I went through a leadership development program. Yeah. My company had already built a machine to successfully get leaders up to speed, up-level them, teach them how to do one-on-ones. And I think about how much of that I take with me today. And it's like, gosh, going to being a leader at a really early stage company, had that been my first experience, I would have just been very ill-equipped to be as decent at leadership as I am now. So what do you think companies can do? So we talked about investing in professional development, but should they be building a leadership development program? Should they be, again, at least just giving it more thought? Like, how do you think about handling it, as you're kind of getting that next level of scale?
The minute you have 2 people in sales enablement, you're probably at a scale where you should be ready to start building that leadership development academy alongside of your IC stuff. If you've got one enablement professional, they're probably completely overwhelmed working on the ICs and CS and AEs and SDRs. But if you've got 2 on 3, you should be thinking about that stuff, right? And making the investment. So you can build a career hierarchy, because that's the other thing, by the way. Most organizations I speak don't have a management career hierarchy, right? Manager, senior manager, director, defined in a formal way, so everyone knows what their personal development plannings should look like. If you don't have that, you're kind of stuffed. But the minute you have that, then it's all right. We're going to build programs around that and cross-discipline competencies, because as a leader, there are some universal things that we need to learn, like emotionally intelligent leadership, difficult conversations, and we can do that as a group, regardless of our function. So there's that. But if you're talking very early stage companies, and I'm just going to do a shameless plug here, that's what we do. It's why we exist, right? We're SaaS.
No, you should. I mean, again, there's
It's
no
the whole reason we live.
that I would definitely reach out to Matt, and we can drop a link to go check out what Matt's doing and why Matt's really an authority to talk about this. Again, because being someone who was fortunate enough to not have to deal with this, we work with enough companies, Matt, where we see what a big, gap it is. We see what a big issue it is that we just have underinvested. And just understand anything, even if it's a monthly learning where you bring in an outside coach or something, anything, how to have a one-on-one, there's a million different things, but check out Matt's programs. We'll drop a link both on LinkedIn and Zoom for it too. So let's talk about, I want to kind of wrap up talking about, we've talked, and we kind of just this is a good segue, talked about kind of at a high level, different things people can do. If you're a CEO and you want to support a leader, right? And so we've talked about more of the kind of professional development, how make sure that they're doing that. And I feel like there's so many leaders that I first-time VPs, Matt, that could make it at least a step 2 or 3, that could be there for 3 to 4 years with a little bit of coaching. So I don't want to dismiss that, but what about more tactically? If you're a company that's looking to, and I think again, even if you're a VP or director and you're looking to support your team more effectively, but specifically let's talk about a CEO trying to support a VP, what are some things that need to happen in that operating rhythm as opposed to like the development rhythm?
Right. So if they've already been hired, then I would say this: you need really clear, documented accountabilities, right? Which sounds obvious, but oftentimes I don't see that. It's like, here's what you're going to be held accountable for. Here's how we're going to measure you beyond revenue, by the way. And here's how it connects to the other functions: marketing, product, etc. So everybody knows what their lanes are and how to stay in their lanes, or where you should be jumping lanes, right? So I think that's very, very important. And you use good language there: operating rhythm. So what is your operating cadence, and how does that overlap with the rest of the organization? So for example, if you're running a quarterly cadence, who goes first? Typically it's product, right? So they'll have a quarterly, monthly, quarterly, whatever product, the major releases usually every quarter. And around that, marketing organizes their events and their campaigns, right? So they'll be previewing the release, hyping it up, yada, yada. And then sales flows in behind that. So you sort of have these dominoes: product, marketing, sales, and making sure that's really well aligned. Sometimes people don't give thought to that, and everyone's doing their QBRs and all that sort of planning stuff at exactly the same time. It actually doesn't make sense. You should have your sales kickoff, right at the time the product's been released, marketing's got everything lined up in advance, and all that sort of carry on. So I think that's really important. And then the other thing, which I think in early stage companies is a challenge, is availability in terms of decision making. Like when your VPs, your execs need a decision, you have to be available to them, or delegate, right? I see a lot of early stage companies where the CEO is slowing things down because they are the bottleneck. And I think that's a challenge.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd add to that, or they're the opposite, meaning they're so hands off that they come in late, and then have these opinions,
right?
Where you've got the opinions about this, and then as a VP, you're like, dude.
No, that's 100% right, Jay, because they come in with 10% of the information and have a strong opinion because they weren't involved in the process.
Right. That's exactly it. And I see that happen a lot. That was probably my experience, at my first 2 VP roles was like, I want, here's the rope. Things are going well. Numbers at every board meeting is fantastic. Numbers are up to the right, but there were other things that I was doing, whether it was, again, not doing a good job of managing cross-departmentally or whatever, that I never got feedback on until there was an issue, or until like it had gone to a certain point. So for me, I really struggled as a VP because I didn't get that, so.
And the last thing I think is their network, sharing their network, right? Because as a CEO, typically you've got domain expertise and you've got a broad network that's relevant for hiring and even for prospecting. And actually, I put a link in our notes, Jake. There's a company that I'm doing something I've never seen before. It's called Connect the Dots, CTD.ai. And what they do is you plug in your email, and if all of us were in the same company and we're all connected in, it scrapes it and figures out that I know somebody because 4 years ago I emailed
with them,
and it knows the strength. And so I think, CEOs need to find a way, executive, to share their network with their team in a frictionless way. I'm sure there are other solutions, but I think that's very important.
I think let's end on, I think Anya's got a good follow-up to that, which is just like, how do you, like, let's say, because again, and I think that this advice, whether you're on the front lines or you're a VP or you're a manager, it doesn't really matter. You have to manage up. And so her question, Matt, and I think this is a good one to roll out on is, what advice would you give if you have a bottleneck in the C-suite? How do you approach that conversation? Like, again, like, let's say as a leader, you self-identify. Again, whether you're hired into the company already or not, I'm sorry, you're already hired in, you're a VP or a manager. I think, again, this, by the way, this could be if you're a rep too. I think that there's probably a lot of similarities. Like, how do you manage that bottleneck? Or have you found people been able to effectively have that conversation and not make people defensive or, lead to the absolute best outcome?
Yeah, I think that any number of frameworks for having the conversation, it all comes down to the politics and the personalities, but most of the time this works. I adapt the SPIN framework and just talk through it to the needs section, right? Like talking about something you're accountable for or a project that has been slowed down. I would say, Jake, I want to chat about the rollout of outreach. We wanted to get it done within 1 month, blah, blah, blah. And the situation is we needed to do A, B, C, D. Problem was bottleneck discussion, blah, 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 challenge, right? The impact of that was it delayed us by 4 months. I want to avoid that in the future. In an ideal world, we better hit the things that you hold me accountable for, blah, blah, blah. So what I need your support and understanding is, in the future, how might we do this better, right? You throw to them, right? For them to go, oh shit, just take me out of the equation. I don't need to be involved in that. Or, oh yeah, okay, I didn't realize that was urgent, and therefore you need to communicate with me in these different ways or whatever it happens to be. But I like that conversation framework, situation, problem, impact, so that the executive understands succinctly why this matters, right? And then let them come up with a solution for it is one way to think about it. What about you, Jake? What framework would you have for that conversation?
That's it. Is you just bring facts and demonstrated evidence, where you're saying like, great, hey, here are the things that have happened. And you always want to bring, especially as a senior leader, you are expected to bring options and recommendations. You are never expected to say, hey, here's a problem. Blah, here you go. That is a surefire sign that you're not ready to be a true executive. Is if you don't kind of appreciate that your job is to always bring to the table, like, hey, here's where I'm at. I've been stuck. I went and had these 4 conversations externally to arrive at these 3 or 4 options. Based on that, here's how I feel the best path forward. Maybe what I've seen demonstrated, though, counter to that is X, Y, Z. And so we need to have a conversation about that. It's always about
I normally would say I 100% agree with you. The only nuance I'd say in this situation, because it's such a politically sensitive thing, I would come with those options prepped.
Oh, exactly.
And say to them perhaps, and I've given this some thought, have some options, but I would let them speak first in case they're feeling defensive, right?
Yeah.
If you think about difficult conversations, there's, how they feel about it, their identity, like, are you challenging their competence or you know what I mean? So you need to be very careful about that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, no, I agree. I think that's actually a good point. It's like we're going back to like I role play these situations like a shit ton of times. You just don't go into it and wing it. Yeah, I think that's it, right? You lead, you let them kind of say like, hey, where have you felt okay, great. Like I think that this is, and 9 times out of 10, like they're aligned to some extent. So, all right, my friend. Well, look, for everyone who's looking, Matt, what's the best website? I think Becca just dropped in here, the sassysalesleadership.com. Is that the best place to?
That's the best place.
Reach out.
Yeah. Managers and managers of managers. We haven't found any courses for managers of managers that make any sense. So we built one. So that's one to check out.
I love that. Yeah, if you're a director, a first-time director, again, impacting the lives of these so many more people, of like 40 people now, it would make sense to get those people some love. And look, everyone, I really hope that you had some takeaways. I think again, whether you're a CEO who's looking to hire, whether you're an individual who's trying to figure out how to move up the ranks, I think that there's enough content in here for anyone. So really appreciate everyone joining. Matt, as always. When are we going to do our next teardown? When's our next annual report teardown?
Man, we need to do that soon.
Yeah, we've got that. Matt and I, if you haven't been following, Matt and I do an annual report teardown every 3-4 months, where we kind of break down how to read an annual report. So I think those have been some extremely well-attended sessions. We got to get another one on the books, but I love this. I love the topic of sales leadership. I think it's one of the more under talked about it's not talking about how to generate more meetings, so it doesn't get as much airplay as it should. And I think, Matt, the stuff that you're doing with your, with your org and, how you're thinking about it is so great. And obviously, as we mentioned, if your company is going through this and you're looking for interim support, I'm happy to set up time with anyone as well there too. So thank you again, Matt. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next Monday. Becca will drop a link. I think next Monday, what are we doing next Monday? 5 pillars of a scalable, with a K, tech stack. So we've got people from Outreach, LinkedIn, and Lead Genius joining us. So if you're like, we're spending too much money on tech, or I don't know what to buy, come tune in. We're going to get really tactical. So it should be a really great session. Matt, thank you as always, man. And we got to get that annual report on the books for sure.
Make it happen. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks, everybody.